What if the person you're destined to love already saved your life, and neither of you knew it? Nyah Washington stood in the corner of the Harlem gallery that Saturday evening, watching strangers admire her paintings with polite smiles and champagne flutes, but she felt invisible. She always did in rooms like this, not because she was overlooked. Nyah was striking, with deep brown skin that caught the light just right, natural hair twisted elegantly, and eyes that held stories most people would never dare to ask about. No, Nyah felt invisible because she had learned to make herself that way. It was safer, easier, less complicated than letting anyone see the weight she carried beneath her calm exterior. The scars no one could see were the heaviest ones of all, and Nyah had been carrying hers for 7 long years. This wasn't just any art exhibition. It was a charity event meant to spotlight underrepresented artists from Harlem, funded by some big Manhattan tech company whose name Nyah couldn't even pronounce. Corporate money flowing into community spaces always felt strange to her. Generous, yes, but also performative. Still, she needed this. Her paintings were her lifeline, the only language she had left when words failed. Each canvas told a story her mouth couldn't form. Pain, loss, survival, hope flickering in darkness. Tonight, 3 of her pieces hung on these pristine white walls, and every single one of them was a piece of her soul on display. She smoothed down her simple black dress, the only formal thing she owned, and reminded herself why she was here. Connection, validation, proof that her pain meant something. Across the room, a different kind of survival was unfolding. Miles Blackwell adjusted his cufflinks and forced himself to smile at another investor making small talk about market trends and quarterly projections. He was exhausted. Not physically. Miles ran 5 miles every morning and maintained a disciplined sleep schedule, but emotionally, spiritually. He was 34 years old, CEO of a company worth hundreds of millions, and he felt absolutely nothing. His penthouse overlooking Manhattan was immaculate and empty. His calendar was full of meetings with people who wanted something from him. His last 3 relationships had ended the same way. Women telling him he was emotionally unavailable, that he prioritized work over everything, that loving him felt like loving a ghost. They weren't wrong. Miles had built walls so high he couldn't see over them anymore. Tonight's charity event was just another obligation. Show face, write check, leave, repeat. But then he saw the painting. Miles had been drifting through the gallery with detached interest, barely registering the art, when something stopped him cold. The canvas was massive, nearly 6 feet tall, and it depicted a black woman standing in complete darkness. But she wasn't cowering. Her face was tilted upward, eyes closed, and above her head, a single burst of golden light was breaking through storm clouds. The contrast was stunning, painful, beautiful, but it was her expression that gutted him. There was agony in her face, yes, but also peace, strength, acceptance, as if she had walked through hell and discovered that surviving it made her sacred. Miles couldn't move. He stood there, champagne forgotten in his hand, staring at this painting like it was speaking directly to him in a language he'd forgotten he understood. Something about it felt familiar, personal, like looking into a mirror he didn't know existed. It's called coexistence. The voice came from beside him, soft, careful, with the distinct rhythm of Harlem woven through it. Miles turned and saw her, the woman from the painting. Not literally, but he could see it in her eyes, the same expression. Survival and strength holding hands. Nyah hadn't planned to approach him. She usually let people absorb her work in silence. But something about the way this man stared at her painting made her chest tighten. He looked like he was searching for something. Lost. She knew that look. She saw it in her mirror every morning. The light doesn't erase the darkness, Nyah continued, gesturing toward the canvas. It coexists with it. That's what survival really looks like. Not perfection, not forgetting, just learning to stand in both at the same time. Miles looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years he felt present. That's exactly what it feels like, he said quietly. I've never seen it painted before. They talked. Not the shallow networking conversation Miles had endured all night, but something real. Nyah told him about growing up in Harlem, about her grandmother who raised her, about how art became her refuge when words weren't enough. She didn't tell him everything. The accident, the loss, the nights she couldn't sleep, but she told him enough. Miles found himself sharing things he never shared. The emptiness, the exhaustion, the feeling that success had cost him his soul. An hour disappeared in minutes. Before Miles left, he did something he never did. He bought the painting, not to impress anyone, not as an investment, but because he needed it. And then, heart pounding in a way that felt foreign and terrifying, he asked if they could talk again. Somewhere quieter. Just the two of them. Nyah hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to protect herself, to stay safe behind her walls. But something in his eyes looked like her own. "Okay," she whispered. Neither of them knew that fate had been working on this moment for 17 years. That their connection wasn't coincidence. That the scars they both carried, visible and invisible, were about to reveal a truth that would break them open and put them back together in ways they couldn't imagine. So here's the question. Can two broken people from completely different worlds save each other? Or will the truth of how they're connected destroy everything? Their first date happened 3 days later, and Miles Blackwell made a decision that would change everything. He showed up to Nyah's world instead of pulling her into his. Most men in Miles's position would have chosen some upscale Manhattan restaurant with a Michelin star and a 3-month waiting list. A place where the wine list costs more than most people's rent and the sommelier speaks in hushed, reverent tones about terroir and vintage years. But Miles didn't do that. Instead, he met Nyah at a small soul food restaurant on 125th Street. The kind of place where the owner knew everyone's name and the collard greens were slow-cooked with love and ham hocks since dawn. The tables were mismatched. The walls were covered in photographs of Harlem's history, jazz legends, civil rights icons, community celebrations. Gospel music played softly from old speakers. And when Miles walked through that door in his tailored suit, every head turned. He was nervous. Nyah could see it in the way he adjusted his tie, the way his eyes scanned the room like he was trying to decode an unfamiliar language. But he smiled at her, genuine, vulnerable, and sat down without pretension. That night, they talked for 4 hours. About everything. About nothing. Nyah told him about her grandmother's Sunday dinners, about learning to paint while sitting on fire escapes, about the way Harlem felt like a living, breathing organism that held her when she needed holding. Miles told her about growing up in a house where achievement was currency, where emotions were weaknesses to be managed, where he learned early that success meant sacrificing softness. And somewhere between the fried catfish and sweet potato pie, something shifted. The walls they both carried started to crack. But walls don't crumble easily. They erode slowly, piece by piece, and both Nyah and Miles had spent years building fortresses around their hearts. Over the next few weeks, they began constructing a bridge between their worlds, and every plank laid revealed just how vast the distance really was. Miles started showing up to places he'd never been. Wednesday night Bible study at Nyah's church, where elderly women called him baby and asked about his soul's condition with genuine concern. Community art workshops where kids from the neighborhood splattered paint with abandon and asked him why he wore penguin suits every day. Street festivals where music poured from every corner and strangers danced like joy was a birthright. At first, Miles felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. But slowly, something deeper happened. He felt seen. Not as a CEO or a success story, but as Miles. Just Miles. The church ladies didn't care about his stock portfolio. The kids didn't know his company's valuation. They cared about whether he showed up, whether he was kind, whether his presence added something real to the room. And God, it terrified him how much he wanted this. Meanwhile, Nyah was being pulled into Miles's world with equal force and far more resistance. He invited her to corporate galas where champagne flowed like water and conversations felt like chess matches disguised as pleasantries. To rooftop dinners overlooking the city where the glittering skyline felt both magnificent and alienating. To gallery openings in Chelsea where art was discussed as investment rather than expression. Nyah showed up because she cared about Miles, but every event reinforced the same gnawing fear. She didn't belong here. The women wore designer gowns that cost more than Nyah made in 6 months. They spoke in coded language about vacation homes in the Hamptons and which prep schools were acceptable for children. And when they asked Nyah what she did, their smiles became polite masks when she said, "Community artist." She could see the calculation in their eyes, the quiet assessment, the unspoken question. What is someone like her doing with someone like him? But Miles never made her feel small. Ever. He held her hand in those rooms like she was the only person worth knowing. He introduced her to investors and board members with genuine pride, describing her art with reverence that made Nyah's chest tighten. He asked her opinion on everything: business decisions, ethical dilemmas, life choices. And when they left those events, he'd loosen his tie, take a deep breath, and say something that broke her heart a little. "I can breathe again now." 2 months in, their romance deepened in ways neither expected. It wasn't just physical, though God knows the chemistry between them could set rooms on fire. It was the intimacy of being truly known. Miles had never experienced anything like it. The way Nyah listened with her whole body, the way she could read his silences, the way she called him out when he hid behind corporate speak and demanded he show up as himself. She made him laugh. Real laughter. The kind that came from his belly and left him breathless. She challenged him, pushed him, refused to let him coast on charm or power. And in her presence, Miles felt something he'd been missing his entire life: permission to be imperfect. For Nyah, loving Miles was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. He was patient with her walls. He didn't push when she withdrew. He created space for her trauma without trying to fix it. When she woke up at 3 in the morning from nightmares she couldn't explain, he held her without asking questions. When she needed silence, he sat beside her and just existed. And slowly, so slowly it felt like learning to walk again, Nyah began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be loved without being perfect. But then the shadows started closing in. It started subtly. A business article mentioning Miles's unexpected romance with a local Harlem artist. Then photos of them together at events, circulating on social media with commentary ranging from supportive to vicious. Strangers who'd never met Nyah had opinions about her intentions. Was she a gold digger? Was this a publicity stunt? Was Miles having some kind of crisis? The scrutiny felt like acid on Nyah's skin. She'd never asked to be public, never wanted to be a headline. But dating Miles Blackwell meant surrendering privacy, and that reality pressed down on her like a weight she hadn't agreed to carry. Miles felt it too. His board started asking questions. Not directly, they were too polished for that, but in the careful way people in power express concern without seeming controlling. Are you maintaining focus on cue for projections? This media attention, is it a distraction we need to manage? His business partner, David, pulled him aside after a meeting and said something that made Miles's jaw clench. "I'm happy you're happy, man. Just remember what happened last time you let your personal life interfere with decisions." The implication was clear. Love makes you weak. Love makes you vulnerable. Love compromises judgment. And despite everything, a small part of Miles wondered if they were right. 3 months into their relationship, everything came to a head at a charity gala Miles's company was hosting. It was a massive event. 500 guests, live orchestra, silent auction, the works. Miles had asked Nyah to attend as his official date, and though every instinct told her to decline, she said yes. She bought a dress she couldn't afford, deep emerald green that made her skin glow, and showed up determined to belong in his world the way he'd belonged in hers. The night started beautifully. Miles barely left her side. He introduced her to everyone as Nyah Washington, an extraordinary artist whose work you need to see. He danced with her while the orchestra played, holding her close and whispering that she was the most beautiful woman in the room. For a few hours, Nyah let herself believe the fairy tale, and then reality shattered it. During dinner, Nyah was seated next to a shareholder's wife, an older white woman dripping in diamonds and condescension. The conversation started innocuously enough, but then the woman leaned in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "It must be so different for you, attending events like this. I imagine your usual crowd is quite Different. The words landed like a slap. The implication was clear, coded in the language of polite racism that Nyah had encountered her entire life. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she smiled. That practiced smile black women learned to deploy when anger would be inappropriate, and excused herself to the bathroom. She stood in front of the mirror, hands gripping the marble counter, fighting tears. This was a mistake. She didn't belong here. No matter how much Miles cared about her, she would always be the outsider in his world. The different one. The unexpected one. The one people whispered about. Miles found her 10 minutes later, concern etched across his face. "What happened?" he asked. Nyah told him, voice shaking, and she watched something shift in Miles's expression. Anger, yes, but also helplessness. Because what could he do? Confront a shareholder's wife at his own company's event? Make a scene? Risk damaging relationships his business depended on? "I'll talk to her," he said finally. "I'll make sure." "Don't," Nyah interrupted. "It doesn't matter. This is your world, Miles. These are your people. I'm just visiting." "That's not true," Miles said. But even he could hear the hollowness in his own words. They left early. The drive back to Nyah's apartment was suffocatingly silent. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came 2 weeks later when Miles made a business decision that sent shockwaves through Nyah's community. His company announced plans to develop a property in Harlem, luxury condos marketed to young professionals. The kind of development that displaced longtime residents and gentrified neighborhoods block by block. Miles tried to explain the economics to Nyah. How the development would bring jobs. How the company had community benefits agreements. How it was progress. But all Nyah heard was her community being erased, repackaged, sold to the highest bidder. And Miles's company was leading the charge. "You don't get it?" Nyah said, voice shaking with barely contained fury. "This isn't just real estate to me. These are people's homes. My neighbors. The bodega where I buy groceries. The church where I found God again after my grandmother died. You're treating Harlem like it's a business opportunity. I'm trying to create something that benefits everyone." Miles shot back, frustration bleeding through his usual composure. "But you won't even consider that there might be nuance here. You're so locked into your perspective that you can't see." "My perspective?" Nyah's voice went cold. "You mean the perspective of someone who actually lives here? Who isn't just visiting for the authentic experience before returning to a penthouse?" The words hung between them like poison. Miles looked at her like she'd struck him. "Is that what you think? That this has all been some kind of cultural tourism for me? That you're just—" "What? An experience?" "I don't know what I think anymore," Nyah admitted, and the honesty of it broke something in both of them. They fought. Really fought. Not the careful disagreements of people still performing for each other, but the raw, ugly conflict of two people whose worlds were fundamentally incompatible. Miles accused Nyah of being so protective of her community that she couldn't recognize genuine help. Nyah accused Miles of being so disconnected from reality that he thought money could solve problems it created. Both were right. Both were wrong. Both were terrified that the thing they'd found together was crumbling in their hands. The argument ended with Nyah asking Miles to leave. He stood at her door, tie loosened, looking more lost than she'd ever seen him. "I love you," he said quietly. "Doesn't that matter?" "I don't know if love is enough," Nyah whispered back. "Not when our worlds keep colliding instead of connecting." Miles left. The door closed, and Nyah sank to the floor, sobbing in a way she hadn't since her grandmother died. For the next week, they barely spoke. Miles threw himself into work with manic intensity, taking meetings at 7 in the morning and leaving the office at midnight. He told himself he was being productive, but really he was running. Running from the emptiness that had returned to his pristine penthouse. Running from the realization that he'd finally found something real and might be losing it. Running from the question that haunted him every time he looked at Nyah's painting hanging in his living room. Was he capable of loving someone without sacrificing who they were? Nyah retreated into her art. She painted furiously, canvas after canvas, pouring her pain and confusion into color and form. She painted Miles's hands, the church where they'd laughed together, the space between connection and distance. And late at night, alone in her apartment, she asked herself the question that terrified her most. Had she pushed him away because he hurt her, or because loving him meant risking everything? Her best friend Tasha came over one evening, took one look at Nyah's tear-stained face and the paintings scattered around the apartment, and said, "Baby, you can't keep running from love because you're scared it'll hurt. Everything that matters hurts sometimes." "What if I'm not enough for him?" Nyah asked, voice breaking. "What if my scars, my past, my world? What if it's all too much?" Tasha sat beside her, took her hand. "That man showed up to Wednesday night Bible study for 3 months straight. He ate Mama Johnson's questionable potato salad without complaining. He learned the electric slide at the block party. Does that sound like someone who thinks you're too much? Then why does it feel like we're destroying each other?" "Because love that matters breaks you open," Tasha said softly. "It's supposed to. The question isn't whether it hurts. The question is whether it's worth it." Across town, Miles was having a similar conversation with his business partner David. They were in Miles's office, city lights glittering below them, and David was being characteristically blunt. "You're miserable without her," David said. "I've never seen you like this. Not over any woman. Not over anything." "She doesn't understand my world," Miles said, but even he could hear the excuse in it. "Or maybe she understands it too well," David countered. "Maybe she sees exactly what you've been running from, that you've built this empire, this perfect life, and you're hollow inside. And instead of being grateful that someone loves you enough to tell you the truth, you're punishing her for it." Miles closed his eyes. "What if I can't be what she needs? What if I'm too broken?" David laughed. Actually laughed. "Man, you're both broken. That's not the problem. The problem is you're too scared to let her see just how broken you really are." That night, Miles couldn't sleep. He stood in his living room at 3 in the morning, staring at Nyah's painting, the woman in darkness reaching toward light. And suddenly, he understood something he'd been missing. The painting wasn't about choosing between darkness and light. It was about standing in both. About surviving by accepting that pain and hope coexist. That scars and strength are the same thing. He needed to tell her. Needed to make her understand that he wasn't trying to fix her or change her or pull her out of her world. He loved her because of her scars, not despite them. Because she had survived and it made her sacred. But before he could call, before he could text, before he could do anything, his phone rang at 4 a.m. with news that made his blood run cold. There had been an incident at one of his company's construction sites in Harlem. An accident. Someone was hurt, and the community was demanding answers. From him, Miles got dressed with shaking hands, called his driver, and headed to Harlem knowing that everything. His relationship with Nyah, his connection to her community, his entire carefully constructed life, was about to be tested in ways he couldn't predict. When he arrived at the site, a crowd had gathered. Angry, scared, demanding accountability. And standing at the front of that crowd, with fire in her eyes and paint still on her hands, was Nyah Washington. Their eyes met across the chaos, and in that moment, both of them understood something crucial. They couldn't keep living in separate worlds, visiting each other like tourists. They either had to build something new together, something that honored both their truths, or they had to let each other go. But before they could say a word to each other, before anything could be resolved, Miles's phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. A message that made his heart stop. A message that would reveal the truth neither of them saw coming. The message was from his childhood therapist. The one he'd seen after the accident all those years ago. The one who'd helped him process the trauma he'd buried so deep he barely remembered it. And it said, "Miles, I was going through old files and found something about your accident. There's information about the person who saved you. I think you need to know this." Miles looked up at Nyah, standing 50 feet away in the middle of a crowd, fighting for her community, strong and fierce and everything he'd ever needed. And he had no idea that she was the answer to a question he'd stopped asking 17 years ago. So tell me this. When the truth comes out, when Miles discovers that the woman he loves is the same person who saved his life as a child, will it heal them or destroy them? Can a love built on fate survive the weight of destiny? Have you ever wondered if the universe has been writing your love story long before you even knew the other person existed? Miles stared at his phone screen, his therapist's message glowing in the pre-dawn darkness, and felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Around him, the crowd's anger swelled, chants demanding accountability, voices calling for justice, the sound of a community protecting itself from yet another corporation that saw their neighborhood as profit potential rather than home. But Miles couldn't hear any of it. All he could hear was the roaring in his ears, the sudden rush of memory that felt like drowning and surfacing at the same time. His therapist had information about the person who saved him. After 17 years of fragments and nightmares and gaps in his memory, he was finally going to know who pulled him from that wreckage when he was 8 years old. His hands trembled as he typed back, "What information? Who was it?" The response came immediately. "I don't have a name, but I have the responder report. Female, African American, approximately 16 to 17 years old, part of a community emergency response program in Harlem. The incident was December 14, 2008, corner of 135th and Lenox. She stayed with you until paramedics arrived. According to the report, she was traumatized by the event. That's all I have." Miles's vision blurred. December 14, 2008, corner of 135th and Lenox. He knew that intersection. He'd walked past it 100 times over the past few months. It was 3 blocks from Nyah's apartment. No, couldn't be. He looked up, searching the crowd for her. And when their eyes met across the chaos, something clicked into place with devastating clarity. The way she'd looked at his scar, the faint line above his left eyebrow that he barely thought about, the first time she'd touched his face, the way she'd gone quiet when he'd mentioned months ago that he'd been in an accident as a child, the way she painted survival like someone who understood it intimately, personally, sacredly. The crowd parted slightly, and Nyah started walking toward him. She looked exhausted, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders tight with tension, paint-stained jeans and an oversized jacket that belonged to her grandmother, the one she wore when she needed to feel held. She'd been up all night too, probably painting, probably fighting the same demons he was fighting. And as she got closer, Miles saw something in her expression that made his chest crack open. She looked at him like she was memorizing him, like she was preparing to lose him. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the noise around them. "About all of this. About your company. About us. About whether we can actually make this work." "Nyah," Miles started, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She nodded, wariness flickering across her face. "December 14, 2008, Miles said, watching her carefully. "Does that date mean anything to you?" The change was instantaneous. Nyah's entire body went rigid. The color drained from her face. Her breathing quickened, shallow and panicked, and her hands, those beautiful hands that created art from pain, started to shake. "Why are you asking me that?" she whispered. Miles took a step closer, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "There was a car accident that night, corner of 135th and Lenox. I was in that accident. I was 8 years old, and someone pulled me out of the car before it." His voice broke. "Before it could get worse. Someone stayed with me, kept me calm. Teenage girl. Part of a community response program." Nyah's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she stumbled backward like his words were physical blows. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Oh my God, no. That was you? The little boy. You were the little boy." The world stopped. Everything, the crowd, the construction site, the city itself, faded into white noise. Miles and Nyah stood there, staring at each other, as 17 years of separation collapsed into a single moment of devastating recognition. "It was you," Miles said, and it wasn't a question. It was a revelation, prayer, an earthquake. You saved my life. Nyah was sobbing now, full body shaking, and Miles closed the distance between them, catching her as her knees gave out. They sank to the ground together, right there in the middle of everything, clinging to each other as the truth rewrote their entire story. I didn't know, Nyah gasped against his chest. I never knew your name. They wouldn't tell me anything after. They said I was too young, that I needed to focus on processing my own trauma. I asked about you for months. Months. I needed to know if you were okay, if you survived, if saving you meant something. And they never told me. Miles held her tighter, his own tears falling into her hair. I tried to find you, he said, voice breaking. When I got older, I tried to track down who saved me, but the records were incomplete. I only had fragments. I didn't. He pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. I've been searching for you my whole life without knowing it. The crowd around them had quieted, sensing something profound unfolding. Strangers watched as a CEO and a community artist held each other and wept, their bodies speaking a language older than words. That night destroyed me, Nyah whispered. I had nightmares for years. I kept seeing your face. This little boy, so scared, calling for his mother. I held your hand while we waited for help, and I promised you everything would be okay. And then my grandmother died 2 weeks later, and I couldn't handle both losses. I didn't know if you'd survived. I convinced myself you probably died, that I'd failed, that I wasn't strong enough or fast enough or... Stop, Miles said firmly, pressing his forehead to hers. Nyah, look at me. I'm here. I survived. Because of you. Do you understand? Everything I've built, everything I've become, every single breath I've taken for the past 17 years. It's because you were brave enough to run toward danger when everyone else ran away. You didn't fail. You saved me. But I was so broken after, Nyah said, her voice small and lost. The scars are the reason you're extraordinary, Miles finished, echoing the words he'd said to her months ago. But now they carried different weight. Now they were rooted in history, in fate, in a connection that transcended romance and entered the realm of destiny. Your scars are proof that you survived something terrible and became someone beautiful. Someone strong enough to save a stranger. Someone strong enough to save me twice. Nyah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written across his face. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. The universe had been orchestrating this reunion for 17 years, weaving their paths back together through art galleries and charity events and 1,000 small miracles that led them exactly here. I don't know what to do with this, Nyah admitted. It's too big, too much. How do we build a relationship knowing this? Miles smiled through his tears. The same way we've been building it. One day at a time. One truth at a time. One choice to stay at a time. He stood up, pulling her with him, and addressed the crowd that had been watching. I need to say something. To all of you. The crowd quieted, watching the CEO covered in dust and tears, holding the hand of one of their own. My company made decisions about this development without properly consulting this community, Miles said, his voice steady and clear. Without understanding what Harlem means to the people who live here. Without recognizing that progress doesn't mean displacement. I was wrong, and I'm going to fix it. He looked at Nyah. She taught me that some things are more valuable than profit margins. That community isn't something you develop, it's something you protect. So here's what's going to happen. We're halting this project until we can redesign it with actual community input. Real input, not token gestures. And if the community decides they don't want it at all, we walk away. The crowd erupted, some in approval, some in skepticism, everyone in surprise. Nyah squeezed his hand. You don't have to do this for me, she said quietly. I'm not doing it for you, Miles replied. I'm doing it because it's right. You just helped me remember what right looks like. Over the next few weeks, Miles and Nyah navigated their transformed reality with a mixture of wonder and terror. The revelation that she'd saved his life as a child added a dimension to their love that neither knew how to process. Every touch carried history. Every conversation echoed with fate. They talked for hours, piecing together fragments of that night. Miles sharing what he remembered, Nyah filling in gaps he'd forgotten. The therapy he'd undergone as a child, the community program she'd volunteered with, the way their lives had run parallel for years, circling each other in the same city without ever connecting until the exact right moment. "Do you think we would have fallen in love if we'd known from the beginning?" Nyah asked one evening, curled up beside him on her couch, her grandmother's quilt wrapped around them both. Miles considered this carefully. "I don't know. Maybe the point was that we fell in love with who we are now, not who we were then. You're not just the girl who saved me. I'm not just the boy you saved. We're two people who found each other despite everything trying to keep us apart." "Fate," Nyah said softly. "Or choice," Miles countered. "Maybe fate gave us the opportunity, but we chose each other every single day after." Nyah smiled. "I like that better. It makes us active participants instead of passive recipients." Miles pulled her closer. "Nyah Washington, will you actively participate in building a life with me?" She pulled back to look at him, eyes wide. Is this?" "Not yet," Miles said, grinning. "When I propose, you'll know. It'll involve your church, gospel music, and probably your entire community because apparently I can't do anything quietly anymore. But I'm asking if you'll commit to figuring this out with me. The cultural differences, the class barriers, the community concerns, all of it. I'm asking if you believe we're worth the work." Nyah kissed him, soft and deep and certain. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. 2 months later, Miles Blackwell did exactly what he'd promised. He proposed to Nyah Washington in her Harlem church on a Sunday morning, right after service ended, in front of 300 witnesses who'd watched their love story unfold. He got down on one knee in his Sunday best, held up a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and said words that made every single person in that sanctuary cry. "Nyah, you saved my life when I was 8 years old. You saved it again when I was 34 and had forgotten how to live. You taught me that strength looks like survival, that love looks like showing up, that home isn't a place. It's the people who see you completely and choose you anyway. I don't have any grand speeches prepared. I just have the truth. I love you. I want to build a life that honors both our worlds. I want to create something new together, something that looks like us. So will you marry me?" Nyah said yes before he even finished, pulling him up and kissing him while the church erupted in celebration. The organ player launched into a joyful hymn. People clapped and shouted and praised God. And Miles Blackwell, CEO and corporate titan, laughed with pure, unfiltered joy in a Harlem church surrounded by strangers who'd become family. The wedding happened 6 months later, and it was everything a union of two worlds should be. The ceremony took place in Nyah's church, with a gospel choir that raised the roof and a pastor who preached about love as an act of revolution. Miles wore a custom tuxedo. Nyah wore a dress designed by a local Harlem designer, with fabric that shimmered like her paintings come to life. The reception moved to a rooftop venue in Manhattan, where jazz musicians played beside a DJ spinning everything from Motown to contemporary R&B. White corporate executives danced next to black church ladies. Harlem artists mingled with Wall Street investors. And in the middle of it all, Miles and Nyah moved together like they'd been dancing their whole lives. During their first dance, Miles whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Both times. Nyah smiled up at him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for finding me, for seeing me, for staying. Always," Miles promised, "for the rest of our lives." But their story didn't end with a wedding. It evolved into something bigger, something that honored the truth of how they'd found each other. 6 months after they married, Nyah and Miles launched a nonprofit called Second Chances, an organization dedicated to supporting youth emergency response programs and providing art therapy for young people dealing with trauma. They poured resources, passion, and personal story into creating spaces where kids like Nyah could process pain through creativity, where kids like Miles could receive trauma support that actually addressed their needs. The first program launched in Harlem naturally, in a renovated community center that Miles's company had helped fund, designed with actual community input, built to serve rather than displace. Nyah taught painting classes to teenagers carrying wounds no one could see. Miles mentored young people interested in business, teaching them that success and soul weren't mutually exclusive. Together, they built something that mattered more than profit or prestige. They built legacy. And on the wall of that community center, in the main entrance where everyone who walked through the doors could see it, hung a painting. Nyah's painting. Coexistence. The woman in darkness reaching toward light. Because that's what survival looks like. That's what love looks like. That's what happens when you stop running from your scars and start understanding that they're proof you're still here, still fighting, still worthy of everything beautiful this world has to offer. Nyah and Miles didn't have a perfect marriage. They still fought about community issues and corporate decisions. They still struggled to balance their different backgrounds. They still had moments where their worlds collided instead of connected. But they showed up for each other. They chose each other. They built something new that honored where they'd both been while reaching toward where they were going together. And sometimes, late at night, when Nyah couldn't sleep and the old nightmares crept back in, Miles would hold her and remind her of the truth that changed everything. "You saved me," he'd whisper in the darkness. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know you're worth saving too." That's the thing about scars, whether emotional or physical. They're not weaknesses to be hidden. They're maps of where we've been, proof of what we've survived, evidence that we're stronger than the things that tried to break us. Nyah's emotional scars led her to art. Miles's childhood trauma led him to ambition. And when those two paths finally intersected 17 years after they first touched, something sacred happened. Something that proved love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose scars fit with yours in ways that create something whole. So here's what I need you to understand. This isn't just a story about a CEO marrying someone unexpected. This isn't just a romance that crossed class and cultural lines. This is a story about fate, choice, survival, and the incredible truth that sometimes the person you're meant to love has been part of your story longer than you ever realized. That sometimes saving someone's life means they'll save yours right back, just in different ways at different times across different years. Nyah Washington and Miles Blackwell built a love that honored pain and hope equally. They created a life that proved different worlds can not only coexist but create something beautiful. They showed everyone watching that your past doesn't determine your worth. Your response to it does. And if you're sitting there wondering whether your own scars make you unlovable, whether your trauma disqualifies you from happiness, whether the pain you carry is too heavy for anyone else to hold, let this story be your answer. You are not too broken. You are not too damaged. You are not too much or too little or too anything. You are exactly who you're supposed to be, scars and all. And somewhere out there, someone is waiting to love every single part of you, especially the parts you think are unlovable. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you believe in fate bringing two people together? Or do you think love is about the choices we make every single day? Have you ever discovered that someone in your life was connected to you in ways you never imagined? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their scars don't define them. They refine them. Let's build a community that believes in second chances, in healing, in love that transforms. I'll see you in the next story.